Hi, my name's Alyssa. Welcome to my channel, Clothing Rainbow. Um, this is my first time ever making a video, so please bear with me. um, I don't have a specific use for this channel yet. I really just am trying things out. But today I'm going to start off with talking about, I guess you could call it a testimony. It's about my daughter, Rosemary. And when she was little. Um, so let's start. When I had Rosemary 2 years ago, she was a beautiful baby. She was very unhappy to be born, to be honest. She cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And it probably was my fault because it was cold in the room. It was probably like 60 something because I was like dying of a heat stroke. But I decided to like just wrap her up and maybe she would be okay, but she just kept crying. And after that, she ended up having to have the Billy lights to fix the jaundice that she had. She had to be under them for 14 plus hours, and then we were allowed to go home. And she still had some little bouts of jaundice after we went home, so we did lots of vitamin D and made sure she was eating lots and lots to kind of just flush it out. So after that, she kept having these problems with like spitting up a lot, and we didn't really understand why, so we kept going to see the doctor, and we kind of just decided that it had to be an allergy. Well, we took out lots of things in my diet. We started off with like normal things like what was it? I think eggs or something. And we just kind of took out the like first five, excuse me, top allergens, and after that, I did that for a few weeks. It was probably like 4 or 5 weeks, and she turned 6 weeks old, and I was trying to trim her nails. And if you know anything about trimming baby nails, it's not as easy as it looks. But it has to be done because them things hurt. So I was trimming them, and one of them, her thumb, I trimmed a little too short. I felt really bad about it, and it sucked because it was like bleeding, and so we would like cover it and put pressure on it. But the second you let go, it would start to bleed again. So we wrapped it that night, and I would like check on her throughout the night, and like there was like no blood coming through or anything. So I was like, okay, she's okay. And the next day, I would unwrap it to let it breathe and everything, and check it and see if it stopped, because it should stop. And I'd unwrap it, and as soon as I'd unwrap it, it would start to bleed again, which was crazy to me. It didn't make any sense. After that, we waited a couple days, and because every time we'd wrap it, it would be fine. But it's like it would get irritated, and like we'd rip it open or something every time we'd take the bandaging off, and it would just start to bleed again. And it wasn't like a gushing blood or anything. It was like just a little bit of blood coming through. And so we were like, okay, well, we probably need to take her to the doctor. I went to work that morning. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm so tired. Anyway, I went to work that morning, and my mom is usually who watches my children, and she was watching Rosemary for me, and I get a call from her, and she tells me, well, Rosemary's just been acting like so upset all day. Like, she won't even let me put her down. And I was like, that's weird. She told me that she would cry anytime my mom would move, basically. And she said that she wasn't like eating a whole bunch. And then at one point, She told me that she found a hematoma, which I didn't know what that was, on the back of her thigh. And so I asked my mom, I was like, what is that? She's like, it's like a bruised vein. Like it's got a bubble in the vein. And I was like, what is that? And she told me that it worried her. She's like, did you grab her wrong or something? I was like, how do you grab a 6-week-old baby wrong? That doesn't even make sense. And she was like, I just thought I'd ask. So I told her, I was like, well, as soon as I get home, I'll take her to the doctor. And I got home and, excuse me, I don't know why I keep yawning. I packed my baby up, got my sister who was living with us at the time, and we went to a Baylor hospital. As soon as we got there, like, I felt bad. Like, I should have listened to myself, but I felt bad. We got in there, and the lady at the front, she tells me that if we need to be seen by, like, a pediatric specialist, we'd have to be taken somewhere else because they don't have that. They don't have a NICU or anything. And I was like, okay, I mean, I guess. Whatever. Then we go back to the room and we fill out excuse me. Sorry about that. I don't know why I'm so yawny. But anyway, we start talking to the nurses and they tell me all these things. And they're like, okay, well, let me know about your baby. What's going on? They ask all the normal questions, but then they ask, like, whatever it was, like vaccines. They asked me if she was vaccinated. And before I could even say a word, they go, we don't even know about babies. And I looked at my sister and I'm like, that does not make me feel okay. You don't know anything about babies? Like, this is a hospital? But okay. And then I felt like they were just out there because they came over and they were going to check her lungs, I guess. Oh, excuse me. They were going to check her lungs, and so they came over and put the stethoscope to her, and they listened for a minute, and they're like, I don't hear anything. And I look at the lady, look at my sister. The lady moves it, and she's like, oh, there it is. And I was like, I don't know if we should be here anymore. And the two ladies, they just kept laughing and thinking it was funny. And I'm looking at my sister. I'm like, this place makes me feel weird. I don't know if this is a good place or not. And my sister's like, well, maybe the doctor's better. And I'm like, okay, maybe. So we wait for the doctor. He comes in a little bit later. And at that point, the finger had stopped bleeding. Because before I went to take my baby to the doctor, my sister and I actually had went to CVS and got 2 different things of blood clotting stuff. Like, I don't know what it's called, but it's like a paste that you put on the bleed and it makes it stop, makes it coagulate. And then there was another one that's like this paper stuff that you put on it. And the paste didn't work. So we did the other, and I guess it eventually started to work. Anyway, so we go to talk to him, and he comes in there, and I show him the thumb, and he looks at it, and he's like, well, you know, I don't see an infection, so I think she's okay. Just keep an eye on it. If it gets red or swollen or hot to the touch, bring her back. And then he was going to leave, and I was like, well, wait, so that's it? I mean, you looked at her thumb, but you didn't look at her leg, and she's been acting weird. And he's like, came and looked at her leg, and he's like, oh, that's just a blood clot from her thumb. I looked at him, and I was like, a blood clot from her thumb that was bleeding? And he's like, yeah, it's just, it clotted somewhere else. And I was like, okay, I would understand if it was in her arm, maybe, but all the way in her leg, that doesn't make sense to me. But I left it alone, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then he started talking to me about his children, and I was like, sitting there watching the time, and I'm like, I don't know why this man's telling me about his children. Like, I'm here to talk about my baby? You want to talk about your children, find me outside of the hospital? Not while I'm in here trying to figure out what's wrong with my kid, you know? And so they discharge us, and we go to walk out the building. And I look at my sister and I tell her, I'm like, I don't know, I still feel weird. Maybe we should take her over to the children's hospital. And my sister's like, if that's what you want to do, do it. I'm looking at her, I'm like, I mean, she's sleeping now, so maybe she's okay. And her thumb's clotted, so, I mean, maybe she just was having a bad day. I don't know. So I tell my sister that we're going to go home. We go home, and I'm breastfeeding at this point, so, like, every hour, I'm still breastfeeding. She's still wanting to eat. And it was probably 10 o'clock at night, maybe a little earlier when we got home. And I feed her, I put her to bed, and her bed's like right next to mine, and I go to sleep. And it wasn't until like 9 o'clock the next morning that I woke up, and I woke up because I heard her making these like little groaning sounds, and I was like, okay, and like my breasts were hurting really bad. I can feel the pain right now, like just thinking of the pain of what your breasts just feel like if you like went a whole night without feeding. Ugh, it hurts so bad. But anyway, I woke up, I go to check on her, and I'm like, oh, I'm hurting, I need to feed the baby. And so I pick her up, and she's like making these weird sounds, you know? And so I pick her up, and I'm like trying to put her on the breast to eat, and she just sits there, mouth agape, just sitting there staring. And I'm like, okay, weird. And she whines a little bit, and I'm like, well, eat. I know you're hungry. I'm so full I'm about to bust. Come on now. And she just wouldn't eat. So I pick her up, and I held her like this, like under her arms, under her armpits, and I'm trying to sit her on my lap because I'm laying in my bed. I'm trying to sit her in my lap so that I could get a look at her face and talk to her. And she just kept straightening her body, like just straight. I'm starting to worry at that point, and I look at her face, and my other daughter came in the room, and she was 5 at the time, I think. This was 2 years ago, almost. So she just turned 5. Yeah, I don't know. I have to think about it. Math. But anyway, I'm looking at Rosemary's face, and her eyes just start rolling in her head, just rolling. And it starts to freak me out, so I tell Leia, I'm like, go get Grammy, because we lived with my mom at that time. We lived in the same house. And I was like, go get Grammy. Tell her I need her. So my mom comes in there, and I just go like this. Take Rosemary. And tell me if I'm crazy or if something's wrong. Because I'm starting to freak out. My mom sits down on the bed, takes her, and it felt like forever that my mom was staring at her, but it probably was only about a minute. And she looks at her and she goes, I'm pretty sure she's having a seizure, so we need to take her to the hospital. And I jump out of bed, put some clothes on. I didn't even care. I just threw something on so that I wasn't naked. And I get the diaper bag, fill it with some diapers, a pair of clothes for her, and my pump stuff. And my mom's like, you're probably not going to need any clothes or anything, just so you know. But whatever. And I was like, well, I need the pump stuff because I'm dying right now. So we're going to pump while we're driving down the road. And I get Rosemary put into a car seat. And at this point, Rosemary hates car seats. Like, anytime you put her in one, she would scream. She hated them. That night, or that morning, I go to put her in there, and I'm starting to shake and feel weird because this is like a very like horrible moment in my life. Like, it was a very scary moment. Anyway, so I put her in the car seat, and she was still and quiet. Not a peep came from her. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, this is just so weird. This is not my baby. I don't understand. And I took her downstairs, and my sister's like, what's going on? And I told her what's going on, and she's like, okay. And I'm like, I need someone to watch Leia. So my grandmother, who was also living there at the time, there was a lot of people in the house. I mean, there was my mom and her husband, me, my stepbrother, I think, was still living there. My sister was there. And my grandma was there because she broke her foot, so she had to be taken care of. Anyway, I took Rosemary down in the car seat and I put her on my grandma's bed. And I'm like, do you see this child? And she's not acting right. And she's like, normally she cries in the car seat, doesn't she? I was like, exactly. And right now she's quiet. I don't understand. She's like, this is strange. I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, I don't either, but I'm freaking out. And so my sister gets dressed. She's going to go with us. Joey, my mom's husband, takes Leia and watches her for me. So my mom, me, and my sister and Rosemary go to the Plano Children's Hospital. And I love children's. They're the best. I absolutely love children's. When Leia was little, she had her face bitten by a dog too, and they took really good care of her. So that's like my go-to place, which is why for this story, I hated myself a lot because I had this thought to go there, but I didn't go. I went to Baylor, and it had to do with insurance or something. I don't even know. Or it was like an urgent care or something that was Baylor, and I was trying to just do something. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know. Anyway, we go to the Children's Hospital, which from where we lived was about a 45-minute drive to an hour. We get there, we go inside, and I'm shaking. I had pumped on the way, so I at least had a little relief in some way. And we get inside, and this dude's at the front, doing his little typing thing, checking people in. And I go up to him, I put the baby in front of him, he's like, what are you here for? And I tell him, so my baby is not acting right. I told him about the thumb and the hematoma, and I told him that right now she hasn't eaten since 10 o'clock last night. She's not responsive. She's, just sleeping. She had her eyes rolling in her head. She's just not acting right. And he I swear he rolled his eyes. He might not have, but in my state of mind, it looked like he rolled his eyes. But I did see that look on his face, here we go, first time mom kind of thing, And this is my second kid, so I wasn't that way. I wasn't even that way with my first. I wasn't freaking out about every little thing that happened to her. But he had that little smirky attitude on his face. So he goes down, goes to the baby in the car seat, and starts tapping on her. And literally, I'm shaking. The story just kills me. Anyway, she didn't move. Not a muscle, not a peep, nothing. And he kind of squints his eyes a little bit and is like, okay. So he starts tickling her. Nothing. Nope, nothing. So he goes to actually cause physical pain, pinches her hard. And she goes, and that's it. That's the only sound she made. Didn't cry, nothing. And he goes, all right, picks up the car seat and says, follow me. We go to the back, and they, it went so fast, I didn't even see them do it. They took her out of the car seat, and took her stuff off and put her in on the table and started, poking and prodding her. There was needles everywhere. There was different things attached to her, everything. And it was just crazy. I started bawling. I couldn't handle it. I was freaking out. I need to take a breath. I'm starting to freak out again, like it's happening. Okay. So we get in there, and the ER doctor comes in, and she's telling me that it was a brain hemorrhage, which really freaked me out because I'm like, her brain's bleeding. What do you mean her brain is bleeding? What? And she tells me, she's like, we're going to go do a CAT scan and make sure that it's not trauma-induced. And I'm like, you think I hurt my baby? And she's like, we're not saying that, but we have to know for sure. So they go and check. It's not trauma-induced, which made me feel better because Leia had bumped into her head a few days prior. So it freaked me out a little bit that maybe my other child hurt her. And they're like, no, this has to do with something else. And they started asking me about vitamin K, which she's 6 weeks old. And if you look into vitamin K, you naturally start producing it between 8 and 10 days old. So you technically shouldn't need to get the shot when you're born. There is a reason why we don't need vitamin K. Vitamin K is there to coagulate the blood. And when you're born, we don't need it because your body sometimes can get harmed during childbirth. The baby gets harmed during childbirth. And if you coagulate the blood, the stem cells that can go through the bloodstream get kind of caught behind, and they can't get to what needs to be fixed right away. So that's why God designed us not to have vitamin K until 8 days later, so that our body could heal quickly before then. Anyway, they started asking me about that, and I'm like, no, I didn't get that. And I mean, I didn't get it with my first either. They didn't even have that when she was born. So I'm like, I don't understand why you're asking me this. And then, she made me so mad. She started getting in my face and telling me that it's my fault that this happened to her. And from what I understand, the actual chances of what actually happened to Rosemary is pretty rare. It's not something that happens like every day. But she was making me feel like dirt. Like I chose my child to have a deficiency. Because at 2 weeks old, she had her tongue and lip tie lasered. And if she had no coagulation at all, then she would have been free bleeding, and I would have had to take her to the emergency room, which is something that I had to sign a waiver for. But she did. She did great. It coagulated like that. So it had nothing to do with the vitamin K shot. But in the hospital that time, they were making me feel like it was my fault for not getting it, and just making me feel horrible. And so they told me that they had to give her a vitamin K shot right then, which I didn't want to do at first because I was like, I didn't get it for a reason. It's pure junk. It doesn't even have vitamin K in the shot. So I'm like, it's not even really vitamin K, so why would I do it? And I'm sitting there and I'm contemplating it, and I asked my mom and my sister, I'm like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? And they're like, just give it to her. Just do it. 2 shots later, it still didn't do anything. She's still free bleeding in her head. And she ends up forgetting how to breathe. So we have to flick her feet every so often to make her take breaths. Which was, it was so freaky. It scared me so bad. I was sitting there and all the nurses and everything are running around, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, y'all aren't making her breathe. And I'm flicking her and she's still not taking a breath, and I'm freaking out now. Like, what are we doing? What are y'all doing? And she actually had to have a bag of blood at that point. They were trying to give her blood to, compensate for the blood that's rushing to her head. And they also wanted frozen plasma. And the whole time we're in there, they told me that they have to transfer me to Dallas because they don't have a NICU at the Plano location. And I was like, okay, cool. The dudes that are transferring us get there before the frozen plasma from downstairs gets to us. And then we still had to wait for another 20 minutes with them calling every so often to get the plasma. And I'm like, what is wrong with y'all's place? Seriously, I don't understand. And she ended up needing to be, I'm probably going to say this wrong. I'm pretty sure it's intubated, which is the tube going down your throat, not in your throat. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. You'll have to Google it. But she had to have the tube go down her throat so that she could breathe. And we get put in the ambulance and we go to the Dallas one, which I'm sitting in the back of there just watching her and freaking out. Just freaking out. Just trying to figure out what to do next. We get to the next hospital, and one of the guys hangs back with me, and it's all like, okay, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're not trying to catch you any lies or anything. They're just trying to make sure that we have all the right information. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. I don't have anything to hide anyway, so. And then they start wheeling her off into the NICU, and they pull me back and tell me that they got to do some questions and stuff, and that they need some space for the doctors and the nurses to get in there to her. And I was like, okay, I really want to be with my baby, but I guess okay. So they take me to this waiting room, and not long after, my mom and my sister get there, and they come in there with me. And this lady comes in, and she starts asking me questions, asking me about dietary things, just normal things about staying in a hospital. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I eventually had to go pump again, because it'd been a long time. And we're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. 4 hours later, someone finally comes back and asks if they can take us to a conference room to talk. And at this point, my heart dropped to my stomach. I'm going to cry. My heart dropped to my stomach. And we went into this conference room where it was quiet. And the doctor starts telling us about her problems. And he starts to tell me that soon all of her organs were going to shut down because all the blood was rushing to her head and wasn't going to the other parts of her body that needed it. And he started telling me a lot of it. I don't even remember what he said, because once he started telling me that she was most likely going to die, I just kind of just lost it. He told me that she probably wouldn't make it through the night, and if she did, it would only be through the weekend. And if I prayed to any gods, I needed to start now. And at that moment, I looked at him and I said, "Can I see my baby?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure. But she's not responsive, so don't expect anything." And so we go back to the room, and we had the most wonderful nurse. I love her. She looks up at me, and Rosemary's there, and her eyes are open, and she's like, "Oh, she's so great. She is very responsive, and she's been watching my every move." And at that point, I started bawling again, because I'm like, I don't know what to think at this point. I don't know what to do. I couldn't think. I couldn't think at all. It was the worst moment of my life. I actually, I was going to take a picture, and show y'all, what she looked like and stuff. At that point, she had wires connected to her head all over. She had a tube down her throat, and she had an IV in her arm. She was in just a diaper in this little square box, basically. It was her little crib thing. And after a few minutes, they told me that she was on certain medications now that was going to make her fall asleep. And I said, okay, she can rest. She was on Keppra, phenobarbital, and there was one more. I can't think of the name right now, but she was on 3 different medications for the seizures and for the swelling and the bleeding, and all that. So, anyway, this is a crazy thing. Anyway, so after that day, we kind of just were in a waiting game. The next morning, we had come up when the doctors were all doing their rounds. And there was a group of neurosurgeons and just neuro doctors standing there talking about her with one of the other doctors. And I don't even remember how many there were. There was probably like 6 of them standing there. And the majority of them were talking about drilling a hole in her head so that they could relieve the pressure. And again, there was a doctor that I fell in love with because he said that we are not going to drill a hole in her head. She is responding just fine to all the medications, and we are going to wait and see because it would severely damage her being 6 weeks old and drilling a hole into her head. And I was so happy when he said that. Like, who wants a hole drilled into their 6-week-old baby's head? Nobody. Nobody. Anyway, so after that, I would just go in her little room, excuse me, and just kind of love on her and watch the nurses do what they're supposed to with her. I even would tell them when they're not like turning her the right way or something. Like one day, like they have to turn her head every so often. And one day I actually came in there and I watched them, and I'd seen every time that they had moved her. And for some reason she got moved the same way twice in a row. And I was like, can you turn her head the other way? Because I don't want her to get a flat head. And I know she's already laid that way. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. And I'm like, y'all are supposed to know this. Y'all are supposed to be writing it down. But anyway, so that first night that we were there, this chaplain of the hospital came up, and I'm just watching my baby, and he comes in there and he's like telling me that he's the chaplain and introducing himself and everything, and I didn't think much of it. And then he said, would you like me to pray with you or pray over your baby? And I was like, of course, yes. And at this point, I wasn't a Christian. Like, I believed in God, and I was a Christian for most of my life up until age 16 when I started believing that the Bible was man-made and fake, blah, blah, blah. But at that point, I was not looking for God. I believed there was a God, but the Jesus thing and all that, I was like, meh, whatever. And I was just kind of living my life. Anyway, when he asked me that, it was automatic. It was, yes, pray for my baby. Please, pray over her. And he came over there and he prayed, and I cried. And he's all like, we do have a chapel downstairs, and you can normally find me in there if you need someone to talk to or you want to pray some more. And he also told me that he makes rounds every day. So if he sees me and I want him to pray, then he'll pray with me. And I was like, okay, cool. Which I thought was really neat. I didn't know that was a thing. After that, my mom had been like asking pretty much everyone she knew and everything that if they would pray for Rosemary, which I didn't even think of. Like, my brain just didn't think about that kind of stuff at that point. And it was just a crazy time. Anyway, after that, we were doing like all kinds of tests, all kinds of pokes and prods and all kinds of stuff every day. And eventually, what was it? So eventually she was getting better each day. They did end up putting a PICC line in her because her veins kept blowing because, she was a little baby. So they ended up putting in a PICC line that goes like right, like, I think it's like a millimeter from the heart. It's freaky, really, like, and it takes a long time to put it in because they have to like use an ultrasound at the same time to make it go all the way from your arm into your heart. And it's pretty scary, actually. they did that, and she was being watched for the seizures all the time. Eventually, she didn't have outward seizures. I forget what they're called, but she didn't have those. She started only having absent seizures, which are the ones that are just inside here. Um, you can't see them, feel them, or anything. They're just neurological. Anyway, so she was getting better. We would see the doctors every day, ask new questions, see what plan is, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, we started asking about certain illnesses and stuff, and we did find out that she could have certain things wrong with her, but it wasn't definite because she did get blood from other people, so they couldn't for sure know, because it could have been in their blood, you know? Not that it was like hurting her, it would eventually flush through your system. There wasn't like a definite answer on those things. They did say that she had vitamin K deficiency, which was what was wrong, which can happen 6 weeks to 6 months after birth. And they're like, and it's not common. It's not super rare, but it's not super common either. So it made me feel a little better. They were like, they told me that even if she got the vitamin K shot, it probably wouldn't have done anything. And I was like, okay, that makes me feel better, because then I know it wasn't my fault for sure. Anyway, we kind of just went day by day, seeing what to do. Eventually, she got to a point where we got to take the breathing tube out, and she got to just be held and stuff, which was great. It made me feel so good. It was sad because there were other babies in there that I knew their parents didn't get to see them, and I slept in there every night. Her story is pretty miraculous, though, for a few different reasons. One being the night before she was supposed to get a CAT scan again, to know what's going on in her head, see if the bleeding had finally slowed down or anything, and the swelling had slowed and all that. We had some Mormon friends come up there, and I don't know what you call them. They're kind of like deacons, I guess. But they're like elders or something. I don't know. They're more up there in the church, you know. And I don't know a lot about Mormon culture, so don't ask me. All I know is they came up there and they asked if they could bless her, which is basically like praying over her. And I was like, okay, yeah, go right ahead. She's supposed to have a really big thing tomorrow, and I want to know that something good comes out of it. And so they go to pray over her, and they're like, can we touch her head? And these two big dudes, they go in there, they put their hands on her, and they start crying as they pray over her. It's crazy seeing a baby in a state like that. Your heart just falls. It's awful to see. Anyway, they leave, and the next morning, she does her CAT scan, and then comes back. Or not CAT scan, I don't know why I keep saying CAT scan. MRI. She goes and does an MRI, and comes back, and later we get the results, and they tell us that the results were good. That her swelling had stopped, and the bleeding had stopped. And so all we had to do now was wait for it to retract, basically. All the blood would seep back in, and the swelling would go down, which was amazing. I felt so happy, especially since they had come and blessed over her, prayed over her, or whatever. And it made me feel good, because I was like, that means there really is a God out there. And my mom kept telling me, she's like, I told you, he told me, God told me, he's got this. He's got this. And I was like, I don't understand what that means, Mom. I'm like, I am not godly, you know? I'm not that person. I don't know why you keep telling me these things, because I don't get it. It's not something in me, you know? Anyway, Soon after that, she got to a point where she was moving, happy. I got to start feeding her like normal again. Um, and she started coming off some of the medicine. She came off of one of them. I'm pretty sure it starts with a V. I don't remember what it was called, but it was something. She came off it first, and then we had been in there for almost 2 weeks. And this is the second part that's pretty miraculous to me, is something that should have killed her. Didn't. And something that most children, babies, adults that go through something like this, they're normally in a hospital for months. She got to leave after 2 weeks. Her doctors had approved of it and said that all I had to do was make sure she kept taking her medicine for the seizures and stuff and slowly come off of it when I'm told to, which would be months later. Anyway, after that, we went home, and she didn't like being moved much. You couldn't barely move her. If her head rolled on your arm, she cried out in pain, which I get it. Imagine having your brain stuffed. Your head would hurt too. So I just felt really bad for her a lot of the time. She was having to take medicine, and it would make her sick. It didn't make her sick when it was going in through IV, but her taking it by mouth, I guess it just didn't mix well. She would throw up every time I gave her the phenobarbital. Oh, it wasn't a V, it was a K. Kepra. Did I say Kepra? I don't know. Ignore me. I don't know what I'm talking about. It was phenobarbital, Kepra, and I don't know. It was something else. Anyway, at home, she did really good. We had a physical therapist of sorts that would come out every so often and check on her and see if she was doing better. And she would meet and exceed, every milestone that she was supposed to with this problem, you know? Like, when we left the hospital, they told us that she would probably be more like a vegetable than anything. That she wouldn't be able to walk, talk, do anything for herself, which was pretty disheartening. Like, it made me feel really bad, because I was like, my beautiful baby that was doing just fine a couple weeks ago, now beat death, but will not be able to do anything. It was pretty sad. I was pretty upset by that. But I decided that I was just going to live day by day and see how things went, and do my best to help her to learn the things that she needed to learn. Which was pretty awesome, because every time that the lady would come to our house to check on her, she'd do what she was supposed to. Tummy time, holding her head up, crawling, scooting, all the normal things babies are supposed to learn, though she was behind because, the brain bleed. So, and she was like, I don't really think y'all need me anymore. She meets all the milestones that she's supposed to. I mean, if you feel like you need me later on for speech or something, let me know, but I'm pretty sure she's good. And I was like, that's awesome. That means that God really did do a miracle in her. And the funny thing is, the doctors said that she couldn't do any of those things, and now she's a beautiful 2-year-old. She walks, runs, skips, climbs fences. She can learn how to open things pretty quickly. She can open a bottle of soda on her own. And I have trouble doing that as an adult sometimes. She can open it by herself. Things are tricky sometimes. She brushes her teeth on her own. She feeds herself. She could put all of her clothes on by herself. She's been doing that for a year. The only thing we have trouble with is potty training. She will not go on the potty. That's the only thing I have a problem with. I mean, she's a little brat sometimes. She's a little mean. She likes to pick on her older sister. And that really, that's it. God worked an amazing miracle on her. She was supposed to die. By all accountability, she was supposed to die. And he healed her completely. She has no brain bleed, no seizures, no nothing. I was expecting that she would have seizures after everything still. That it would be something that reoccurred often. But she doesn't. She doesn't have seizures at all. She doesn't have any problems. She has no health issues. She's a miracle. And I like to share her story because it proves that God is real, that He does do things to help us when we need it. I don't know. It was just the turning point in my life as a Christian, because I wasn't one, and then I got to watch an absolute miracle happen, and it changed me. It's amazing. But that is all for Rose. She's a beautiful little girl, and I love her to death. And God healed her completely, so I don't have to worry about anything anymore. And I hope maybe her story helps you in some way, or you can show it to someone that needs help. Maybe you know someone whose baby is fighting in a hospital right now, and maybe they just need a little push like I did to find God again. While I don't believe that He put her in that situation, I do know He brought her out of it and completely healed her. And that was with me not having any faith. Just imagine what He would do and what He can do for someone who has faith in Him. He gives us all of the power and authority in this life. All you gotta do is use it and ask for it. Anyway, I'm gonna hop off. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to ask any questions, I can always do another video of the questions that you make. And if you have any suggestions for videos, let me know and I'll start one. Subscribe.